And welcome to the Cedar Falls Committee of the Whole meeting this July 15, 2019. Now I'd like to call this meeting to order. We have 3 items up for this evening's Committee of the Whole meeting. The first is a river gauge update. The second is the snow removal requests on sidewalks and trails. And the third is bills and payroll. So first up for the river gauge update, I believe Chase Schrage is up for us. Thanks, Chase.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. If you recall, back in May, we came forward with, Brian and myself came forward with a river gauge and Cedar River Dam operations and maintenance discussion. And what came of that was we should look into the potential of adding an additional gauge. And with me tonight, I have Jason and John with the USGS to go over some of the technical information if we need that. So. Just a recap of what we discussed on May 6th was, there's 2 types of gauges that we look at. There's that full river gauge, as what I would call it, that displays the predictions and the volume. That is our current system that we have right now. And then as well as the stage-only gauge, which it only provides the current river elevation at that specific time. So. On June 3rd, I got together with the USGS as well as other city staff to look at the potential locations of the possibility of adding a stage-only gauge. That red icon that you can see on the screen, that is our current river gauge on the First Street Bridge. And then those yellow icons that you see there are additional locations that we looked at. And then that one on the northerly part of Cottage Row Road is a location that we looked at as well. Just a little bit of detail about the locations. We looked at the the Center Street Bridge one that goes across the river there, and due to the proximity of that gauge as it relates to our full river gauge that we have, we would show very little or no benefit at all, just being that it's too close to the current gauge. We traveled about halfway up on Cottage Row Road, looked at another city-owned property that we have there and the potential of putting a stage-only gauge in that location. That one's challenging because it's exposed to many elements. One of the highest ones that we looked at was, that the height of the structure that would be needed in that location, as well as the ice potential and the ice damage that we would have. And then that final location at the end of Cottage Row was one that we determined could be a valid candidate for placement. So some of the challenges we face are structure sizing in that photo there. That's a photo that was provided by the USGS of a gauge that was in another community. Similar to something that we would need to install if we didn't have a structure to attach it to. So if we don't have a bridge or some structure over the river, we would need to build something like this. With that comes, height, ground elevation. The structure needs to be sized appropriately and at least 2 to 3 feet above the record flood elevation. So being that the record flood was in 2008, we need to be at least 3 foot above that elevation, which in some locations, depending on the city property, may need to be 15 to 20 feet tall, depending on where it's located. So, and then obviously the exposure to ice that I discussed a little bit ago, but this specific site at the end of Cottage Row would have a minimal effect for the ice jam and a potential for damage. Another challenge is the FEMA review process. After talking with the USGS, we looked at the type of structure as shown in the photo right there and discussed where it would be placed on the city-owned property at the end of Cottage Row. If you recall, a lot of those properties out there were purchased as a part of a flood buyout, and FEMA dollars were involved. And with that comes deed restrictions. And those deed restrictions state that, no structures or impairments to the floodway can be installed or can be built on those properties. So, I went a little further and called the Iowa Homeland Security and talked about the submittal process and what needed to be done. The initial submittal would have to go through the Iowa Homeland Security. They would review it. They would forward it on to the FEMA administrator, which is out of Washington. And there is a minimum of a 90-day review process for that. So my experience with the review process, the Army Corps, you have your initial submittal. You'll go through 60 or 80 days. They'll provide comments. they'll get the comments back to you, you'll revise those plans and send them back in, and then your new 90-day window will start. So it's kind of a timely process that would take a significant amount of staff time to get approval for that. One of the most significant items would be the datum or the elevation differences. And I don't know if the USGS wants to speak to this, but you know, when we were walking around on site, there's going to be significant challenges with the relationship between our current river gauge and the proposal of a new stage-only gauge. And it's a lot of technical information, but the easiest way to describe it is on a normal pool elevation, like you know, in the low 80s, when our gauge is around 80 to 82, the proposed stage-only gauge at the north end of Cottage Row would be 11 feet difference than our current gauge. So if our gauge downstream said 80, the one at the end of Cottage Row would say 91. So there's a significant difference there, and you know, it depends on the time of year, what elevation the river's at. You know, as the river approaches, I believe, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but 84 or 85, then we'll have 2 or 2.5 of the gates open, or 3 gates, and that will play a role in the fluctuation of the elevation as well. So, you know, we talked about, you know, the cost, and we talked about the benefits. The only benefit that we could come up with was the relationship that a property owner would have between the 2 gauges. You know, they would get accustomed to what the downstream gauge would say, and then what the upstream gauge would say, and then get a relative idea of what it may look like on their property. Having said that, you know, with the time of year and the nature and the ice jams, you know, we can't control the ice jams. And if there's a jam that's in between the 2 gauges or just upstream of the stage-only gauge, we're gonna have the same problem as we did this previous year. I mean, that's uncontrollable. We're gonna have it wherever we put it. So with that, you know, the whole relationship that a property owner would have between the 2 gauges is kind of based on where they're at in the corridor. You know, are they kind of a third of the way down, or are they all the way at the end? So there's challenges there. And then the last item there's no additional inflow from adjacent streams, so the fluctuation from our current gauge that we have to putting one upstream would be very minimal. So kind of having said all that, we looked at that location at the end of Cottage Row on the northern end, and with the sizing of the structure that we needed, the USGS provided us with an anticipated installation cost of around $22,000, with the $5,500 thereafter that is for the general maintenance and upkeep of that stage-only gauge. So with that, I think with all the challenges and what we see as being the very minimal benefit that we have, you know, there's what I would call the benefit would be the relationship that the property owners are going to have to establish on their own, depending on where they live at in the corridor, and it's going to fluctuate. It's going to take multiple flood events for homeowners to get accustomed to what that gauge says. I think the biggest benefit is, you know, the homeowners with the significant knowledge along the river are the ones that have been there for 10, 25 years, whatever it is, and you know, they know what elevations it's at. You know, they can look out their window and say it's at the base of their tree in their backyard, and they know it's at 91. And this is going to be a similar effect. It's going to take significant flood events and many years for them to get accustomed of the relationship between the 2 gauges. And like I said, it depends on the time of the year and how many gates we have open. So it may depend on each event what they see of the benefit for that. So I think with that, if we would like to continue to proceed with the placement, we would like to see it at that one location at the end of Cottage Row, and that is obviously contingent upon FEMA's approval. So.
Thank you, Chase. For council's consideration, I'll certainly open it up for questions clearly to Chase or the other gentlemen that are here as well from USGS. Any questions? Ms. Madore.
Well, it sounds like there's extremely limited benefit to this additional gauge. Is there any other, I don't know, readings or anything we can do to the one that we have so that when we have ice jams, that it gets more accurate information?
I'll have the USGS kind of explain our current system and what we have and how accurate it is, and if there's a potential for that.
All right, I'm Jason McVeigh, work for the USGS. We're out of the Iowa City office, just to let you guys know where we're at. Well, the current gauge we have has been there, for a long time. It actually originally was ran as just a stage-only site, and then we turned it into, with cooperation with you guys, turned it into a stage discharge site. And since it's a stage discharge site, the National Weather Service can use it to make projections. It's a flood forecast site. If it was a stage only, they're not flood forecast sites. As far as accuracy of that site in relation to anything upstream, all of our gauges, they're published as being accurate to a certain value, and that depends on the data that we've collected. Most of the time, it's 0.02 to 0.04 feet in elevation. So when you're talking accuracy, the data is accurate. But as far as representing what's going on upstream of that dam, it's not going to represent anything up there, the gauge that's in Cedar Falls right now. Mainly because of the fact that you've got the dam. There's different elevations there, there's a change there, and the relationship, the way the river is going to act is going to be completely different downstream of the dam than upstream of the dam. So really when it comes down to it, what Chase is saying is that if you want to know what's going on upstream of the dam, you would need another gauge up there. But as far as the benefit, you're going to have a lot of confusion because everybody's been paying attention to what's downstream, and then compared to it'll be completely different what's going on upstream than what's going down. And it really has to do with that dam. But if you want to know what's going on up there, you need an instrument up there, because what's in Cedar Falls isn't going to help you with that. If a situation like what happened this past winter happens again, that gauge in Cedar Falls currently cannot and will not give you that information. So if you wanted that information, you would need something up there. So.
Anything further from council?
I've got a couple comments.
Sure.
I've met with the Cottage Row folks a couple times since the last meeting or when we first discussed this, and there's several of them out there that don't think this is money well spent just because of the limited gain that you're going to get from it. So, and after hearing some of the confusion that may come from this, I don't know that we want that either. So, we had discussed notifications before. Have we done anything as far as a process to let people know in the event that we have ice jams?
I've provided information through the website that you can get updates for the river projections and current elevation. Obviously, USGS may be able to speak to this, but the ice jams are, depending on where they're at, kind of where they form, it's going to have a different effect every time. I think they've had issues in other communities where we may have a fluctuation of 1 to 2 feet in the gauge reading just because of what's happening in the stream and the ice jam. I know that some of our facilities around Island Park received significant ice damage that it's never seen before. So I'd say this last winter was a rare case, but it could happen again. So
Certainly, and I guess I'm most concerned if we've got a situation at our dam location, then I feel like it's our responsibility to get out and let people know. So, your Bentons or your other people that are going to be affected by that, and I don't know how far we go with that, but it seems like it's our responsibility to make sure we're out there letting people know that the gates aren't open. Now, we've taken the steps to make sure that doesn't happen, I believe, with leaving the gates cracked or whatever our intent is there, but it sure seems like it's our responsibility,
we
at
could
least to make a
definitely-
phone call to some folks.
Could definitely look into setting up some automated system and getting some email addresses from some of the residents to shoot out kind of a press release information about the dam and the river gauge and what the heights are projected to be. I mean, we can try to assist with that by sending out emails.
Is there any way that we could tie a notification to the USGS site specific to Cedar Falls?
Sure, I gotta lower this down. Yeah, my name is John Nanny with the USGS. So we have this system with the gauge that we currently have called Water Alert. There are probably many users in town that already use it. It's basically a text or email notification system, free, that any user sets to whatever threshold that they want. Could be a low. If the water drops to a really low level, could be a concern to the wastewater allocations, but high is generally what people want it for. So when it crosses a certain threshold, maybe someone wants to set it a few feet below the National Weather Service flood stage, they could set it to that, or at the flood stage. It's really user dependent. A lot of city officials, emergency managers use it to get notifications via text or email. That could be one way that you guys notify yourselves, and then it could be used to maybe trigger another alert that some other city officials send out. But that's that location right at where the current gauge is, so it's below the dam. So if there was an ice jam, say, at the dam, it might not be representative of what's going on downstream. So the gauge at that, where we have right now, it's accurate. It's reading the correct elevation just within a few hundredths of a foot. It's just maybe what's going on upstream of the dam is uncertain, especially when there's an ice jam. But yeah, there are some notification systems that we have.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. I mean, do you put it on KWWL? Do you send it out? I mean, keep a track of people's emails. That changes all the time. So is there a way that we can go to the site everybody's going to anyway, in the event that we've got a situation like that, and put out a city notice of some sort?
We have, under the Notify Me, we have people can sign up for flood announcements. So when we do send out a press release, if they're signed up for that with their current email, then they would receive notice of any press release we do.
We can certainly work to get the word out proactively as well. Two things catch my mind from this last instance was individuals calling, much what Chase indicated, that they said the river gauge says 90, but I know my second step is 92, so something's wrong. And then I think it might have been maybe an hour or two, maybe 3 later, we did a press release letting folks know the gauge that you're seeing on your computer probably isn't accurate. So I think between those two combinations and working between now and then to let folks know they can be even more proactive, I think would be a step in the right direction. Anything further from council? Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Chase, and thanks to you two gentlemen as well. Appreciate you coming in. Moving on to the next item is snow removal requests on sidewalks, trails. Mark Ripplinger and Brian, I think, up for this.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about snow removal. This is a topic that was brought up a few months ago, I believe during goal setting, what the city policy is on our removal of snow on the recreation trails. Specifically right now, the sections of trails that are cleared are adjacent to city properties. We do that as a courtesy and treat them like sidewalks, so we will clear rec trails next to the recreation center and other parts of the community. We also clear recreation trails as they cross bridges, so people don't have to walk in the street if they're in those particular areas. And then also where we have higher pedestrian usage, such as along University Avenue, which we started this last year, and near schools. Recently, we had a group of individuals, I believe, meet with the mayor and City Administrator Ron Gaines to request that the city consider expanding our snow removal in other areas of the community to allow what I would call maybe more summertime use on our recreation trails in the winter. And so that's what we'll talk a little bit about tonight. I want to turn the presentation over to Brian Heath, who will talk a little bit about our policies and how we go about snow removal in our community.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark, Mayor, Council. I want to talk a little bit about our schedule first, or operating procedure, if you will, during any given snow event. Schedule, I don't think, is a real good word because you can't schedule a snowfall. It'd be nice if we could. But a typical situation for us, we're using our entire staff. We're using park staff, we're using street staff, we're using a lot of refuse staff. All the mechanics are in. And the way we get started, everybody's out doing priority streets. We're doing priority 1s, priority 2s. Some of the park staff that does this trail snow removal, they're either working where we've got shortfalls in staffing, or they're out working cul-de-sac routes, which they go out in a pickup, clean cul-de-sacs, and make the way for our larger trucks to have an easier go of it. Say it's 5 in the morning or 4 in the morning, we got to break a couple of those guys free so they can go down to the rec center, library, community center, and get started with cleaning those parking lots, sidewalks, et cetera. And then shortly thereafter, then they got to break away, City Hall, other public buildings in the city. So we lose some of our street snow removal staff at that point. Once we get caught up with priority 1s and 2s, they get done, we kind of reassess what's going on with our full plow staff, our street staff. We'll fill voids where we need with these guys and gals that are working on the trails and the parking lots, et cetera. If we've got plenty of staff out on the streets, then we'll turn them loose, clearing the remaining trails, sidewalks around schools, you know, some of the outer trails just to make everything, all of our trails more pedestrian friendly, trails and sidewalks. This whole process can take up to a couple days, depending on the amount of snow. If it's a light, fluffy snow in the first few of the year, it goes pretty quick. But once you get back-to-back accumulations, then obviously, you know, it piles up and it's tougher to find storage for that snow. Our current policy, procedure for clearing trails, we're clearing about 7.5 miles of trails, mainly in front of city-owned properties, like Mark mentioned, properties near schools and high pedestrian areas. And it's intended more for the pedestrian-type traffic. We do bridges, we do the Main Street Bridge, we do the Center Street Bridge, and then we do the area in between that around the parkade. We do an area around around North Cedar School, around Lincoln School, the rec center, et cetera. So with all that, it takes typically 40 man-hours to complete for, like I said, the typical 3-inch snowfall. So with that, we're looking at about $30,000 annually. That includes manpower, equipment usage, fuels, again, for an average event. So we're looking at an additional request that came into the city. We're looking at the possibility, or the request was to clear an additional 9.5 miles in more remote locations, areas where we may be more susceptible to windrowing of snow, where we may be more susceptible to drifting of snow, things like that. So we took our best estimate that we could based on some of the factors that we face out in those areas, and we came up with about 50 more man-hours to clear these additional miles of trails. Equating to around $38,000 annually. So for the total, we're looking at clearing almost 17 miles of trail. That includes the sidewalks, rec trails, et cetera. 80 man-hours is kind of what we come up with for an estimate, $68,000 annually. Again, that's for manpower, equipment, fuel, things like that. That doesn't include additional equipment, and I might mention at this point where we have, for clearing these trails, we use 2 polar track units, which are a lighter weight snow removal piece of equipment, which is basically a Toro Groundsmaster. It's one of our front end mowers that's converted to a snow blower. The problem with those is they're great for the light, fluffy snows, but you start getting into windrows, you start getting into drifts, they're just not built heavy enough to sustain that type of usage. We also, recently, we were able to acquire a Bobcat Tool Cat, which is a larger unit, heavier duty unit, and we have the ability to use that for not only a rotary plow, but a regular snow plow, and that seems to do a very good job on some of the heavier snows where we've got windrows that have impacted the trails or sidewalks, and also drifting. Looking at an additional one of those units with a couple attachments, we're looking at about $100,000. So what I want to show you here, and I apologize for the small maps, but we tried to break these up into quadrants to make them more visible. What we're showing here is the red is the current areas that we clear. this being out north of town, and the blue is proposed. The red in this particular case is the new North Cedar rec trail that goes from Lone Tree down to through Cottage Row. With the North Cedar School being out there, our intent is to clear that from Lone Tree down to Clare Street for walkability to North Cedar School. The blue proposed, the proposed request goes from Blackhawk Park on the west side, which is the left side of that screen, up to Big Woods Road, and then from Big Woods Road going south beyond the lake to the south side of the lake, exiting out on East Main Street, or I'm sorry, on Big Woods Road over there. So that's a pretty significant stretch of roadway there, trailway. Next, we're looking at our current, being the red again. We got Hudson Road from First Street down to near the university property, and then also 12th Street from Hudson Road to the west to the Birdsell Park driveway. We also got a section there over near Waterloo Road that we clear from 12th Street, the rec center, Main Street. We clear the Waterloo Road from 12th around to near utilities there by the creek over the bridge. And then we got a small section, like I mentioned earlier, around the two bridges on the river, which is the U shape that you see on the top of the screen. It takes care of Center Street Bridge, that trail along First Street, and then back across the Main Street Bridge. And again, that's for walkability for pedestrians around the downtown area. The proposed addition here is to go west on 12th Street from Birdsell Park Drive out to Union Road. And then on the right side or the east side of this map, from the utilities, Waterloo Road near the utilities through the trail through to Pfeiffer Park. So the stretch there as well. Another segment, and this is relatively new for us, the current, is we've finally taken on the remaining segment of University Avenue. So now we got the full gambit of University Phase 1, 2, and 3, as well as the existing that we've done in the past, and that goes from College Street all the way out to the east city limits on the right side of the screen. And then we also have a segment there of Main Street that goes to the Paw Park. That's the red line that you see going south in the center. The proposed here again is to continue South Main out to Green Hill Road, and then we're looking at Green Hill all the way across from Cedar Heights to Hudson Road, and then Cedar Heights from University to Green Hill, and then Hudson Road from University to the south. So that's a pretty significant amount of trail to be added to the list. Some of the benefits, as Mark mentioned earlier, were that it kind of opens the trails up to be more usable for summer type activities, biking, running, etc. The challenge that we really face here is not only keeping the trails clear, or clearing them initially, I should say, but keeping them clear of snow and ice. It's going to take more manpower to do that. It's going to take staff away from our normal snow and ice control duties. Again, I mentioned the high winds, the windrows of snow that impact the trails in certain areas. Lone Tree especially has a stretch between Center Street and Hiawatha Road that is very close to the roadway. In fact, all the way to Blackhawk Park. And the trucks usually wing that back, and it ends up impacting the trail. So that would be a difficult one to clear. Mention the equipment, the additional equipment that would be necessary, and again, just the overall effort that it takes to not only clear the streets, but then to turn around and try to clear the trails. So them are some of the challenges we face. Again, the thing that worries me more than anything is that I think one of the real intents here for this request is to clear trails for bicycle usage. And it's going to be so difficult for us to stay on top of that. If you get a freeze thaw overnight and you get a patch of ice that's melted down and can't drain away because you got windrows of snow on both sides, I would be really concerned about that with bicycle safety. Because it's just not going to be possible for us to get out early in the morning to address those issues And then again, you got your chemical that you would have to add if you were going to treat that. I will mention sidewalk and trail concrete is much different than roadway concrete, and Chase could probably attest to this, that you're not looking at the DOT specified concrete always on trails, so your aggregates are not maybe the best quality or as good a quality as you would have on roadways. So the impact that our salt may have on that could intensify. Here's an example of some of the equipment that I spoke of, the tool cat that's been very useful for us. We were able to purchase one of these a year or so ago, and it's been very beneficial. The picture on the left there shows it with a rotary plow, and the picture on the right shows it with a normal V-type plow. The thing you run into with just trying to plow the trails, of course, you're windrow and snow, and then pretty soon it starts pushing back. So the only option then you would have would be the snow blower that's on the one on the left there. So just to give you an example of some of the equipment that we're using, a little more heavy duty, something that can get through them windrows, something that can break out the intersections of streets where trails meet the roadway. I'm going to turn this back over to Mark, and he's going to talk a little bit about the proposal that we have this evening.
Brian, Brian, before you go, can you just clarify for me, early in the slides you mentioned the normal snow removal for the arterials, the main streets, not work your way down. It was roughly $30,000 per event. Was that accurate? I should have asked you back then when you were going through it. Sorry about that.
For annually,
It's annually.
yes. I may have
No, I
misspoke.
know,
It's that event, but I believe it's listed annually,
I have a
yes.
feeling I might have missed it.
Yeah,
there's-
38,000 annually.
So then go back to normal streets, okay, 30,000 annually for manpower, equipment, fuel, and that, I guess what I'm trying to find out is if we have a real heavy snow one weekend and everything works perfectly and everything gets cleared, and then another snow, I mean, much like last year, that, all of that is 30,000 annually, or is that?
That, if you have a typical winter, that's kind of based on a typical winter. But when you go back to back to back, like we had from
Sure.
January 12th through March, who knows what that could be? I mean, when you're talking about, you got heavy wet snow, you got ice underneath the snow, you got a lot of factors become involved in that. This would be a typical winter, which last year was not.
Okay, and I might be not making myself clear. At the very bottom is 30,000 annual for manpower, equipment, fuel per year for average winter snow event.
Right. And our average is about 30 inches per year.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then equating that to the next slide you did have in relation to doing all additional 9.5 is an additional 38,000 for the season,
For the
not per
season,
event.
annually. And
Okay.
then the total to do all, we estimate, a rough estimate of $68,000
Okay,
annually.
thanks. Yep, appreciate it.
Okay? Other questions for me? Okay, turn it over to Mark.
So keeping in mind that some of the information Brian passed on in our current policy, which is to utilize our rec trails for winter use only, but also keeping in mind the policy that we want to provide safe pedestrian passage near schools and other high pedestrian use areas. We are proposing that we increase some of our snow removal in some of these areas based on that current policy, and one of them would be, since we're going to clear the snow on Center Street from Lone Tree down to Clare Street near the school. Now that we have a connection there, we're proposing that we would clear snow then from on Lone Tree Road out to Hiawatha, which would then capture any school kids that are north of Lone Tree Road there. They'd be able to get on that rec trail and then go down the Center Street rec trail and get to school. So that's one proposed area that we're looking possibly increasing under our current policy.
Mark, just a moment. Are you saying you're recommending what you put in green, not what's in blue?
I'm sorry, yes,
Okay.
we're recommending what's in green, and that the green is part of the proposal from the individuals who want to increase the snow removal in the community. So that green is part of one of their requests. The other section I think we can justify under our current policy would be to extend, continue our snow removal on 12th Street from Birdsell Park entrance out to Hudson Road. Councilperson Green passed on some information to our city administrator that showed some technical data that indicated that that's a heavily used corridor for people that exercise. It was kind of some interesting information. He might be able to pass that on, what that was, but it showed a kind of heat. Was it heat?
Yeah, as a heat map, just
Heat map.
showing annual use on all the different roads.
Yep. I'm sorry, it would be 12th Street extension from Birdsell Drive over to Union. I'm sorry, Frank. And then the other section would be where we clear trails down by the rec center down to Highway 58. We could continue that small section in green shown there that would capture anyone over in the Grand Boulevard area. So they would be able to come down Grand Boulevard and able to access onto our rec trail system up to the recreation center. The south part of the community, we feel at this point does not fit in with our current policies as far as high pedestrian usage areas nor near schools. So we are recommending that that remain, what we show in red would be the areas we'd clear. So from a staff recommendation, we talked a little bit about what the proposal is. I think staff can, at least at this point, recommend to City Council that we increase our snow removal efforts in the areas that's shown in green. And then all other areas would be utilized for winter trail usage, which would be snowshoeing, snow skiing. I know there's a group of individuals that use our rec trails for fat tire bike riding in the winter. There's actually a group that does that. However, if the City Council wants to continue to look into this at goal setting, we hope we could provide, you have the information what would take staff and current budgeting to clear the additional 9.5 miles. We can also reach out to some contractors and see what they would charge per typical snow event, so we could have that information available for goal setting if it's a topic that you would like to discuss at that time.
Great, thanks, Mark. Open it for questions with council. Yes, Sue.
Just a quick question. If we just do what's in green, are you still going to need the $100,000 for additional equipment?
No, that's probably an extra, I didn't calculate that, but it's probably not more than an extra mile in green.
Mr. Dara?
Do we currently have any snow, recommended snow routes that are on street? Have we ever identified streets that are cleared enough that we could just sign as winter bike routes instead of clearing the trails, identify streets that we know are going to be cleaned often and would be used for bikers?
I don't think we've actually looked at that specific designation. We do continue to clear rec trails, like in Clay Street where we have the designated lanes. We have designated lanes on, I believe, 12th and 18th, and, we do clear curb to curb, but we have not really looked into, at least at this time, providing designated snow routes, designated on-roadway snow routes. They would be subject to our ability to clear the roadway in our current manner.
That might be an alternative to, we're already clearing the streets, and if we just took extra care on those streets that were identified as bike routes, I don't know enough about it, but that might be an accommodation.
Anyone further from council? There is a recommendation from staff if there's a motion to approve or otherwise amend or not at all, I'm open to that, or we can move forward.
Move to accept staff recommendation.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the staff recommendation. Any further discussion from council? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Last item on the agenda for the committee of the whole, is there a motion to approve bills and payroll?
So moved.
Second.
Motion second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. That concludes this evening's Committee of the Whole meeting, and we'll wait to the top of the hour for our regular city council. Thank you.